Hello! It's Friday, February 17th, 2017.
Today on the Broke Canadian Newscast,
We will be talking about Colten Boushie.
the liberal pay-for-access scandal.
And the Yemeni Civil War.
I'm Bandringer.
And I'm the Dino Man.
And this is
The Broke Canadian Newscast.
Newscast.
Two guys with more time than money to spare, discussing local to world affairs. There's Bandringer first with the Dino Man last. Here's the Broke Canadian Newscast.
So how was your week?
Oh, my week was pretty good. I actually have a crazy busy week this week. I'm just meeting up with people all the time.
Just a rather regular social butterfly.
Indeed.
Or at least a social caterpillar that might turn into a social butterfly after it goes into a cocoon for a period of time.
That cocoon's usually winter, but okay.
I mean, that was a great metaphor, or simile, or figure of speech, and I will have no one say anything otherwise.
I don't hear anyone, so I guess you're covered.
Yes!
How about your week?
It's been alright. We're not going to talk at all about, Trump or anything, but that's why I feel like I've been spending most of the week following this 5-ring circus, probably 10-ring at this point.
9 circuit circus?
Ooh, topical. Yeah. I also didn't realize that the White House became like Poland after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact.
Ooh. Google that reference, kids.
It's a really funny joke that I didn't spend any time at all, and it came off right off the top of my head, okay, guys?
Off the cuff.
I did not spend several minutes trying to look up the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact to get it right.
And practicing the 4 times to make sure you say it without slurring or anything.
I mean, I said it wrong 5 times, but that makes it funnier.
It does.
So before we get into it, because there were some major developments on some of the stories we were looking at, I figured we'd do some quick follow-ups on stuff we've done before.
Sure. I think that's good. So I'll start with the first one.
Okay.
We were talking very, very early on about electoral reform and spent a whole bunch of time talking about all the different systems, and that time is now apparently wasted because it has been determined that that's not where they're going forward.
It has been wasted just like the legislature's time.
Yes.
And everyone's time with this whole thing. Essentially what seemed to happen is that the Liberals and Justin Trudeau favored a rank ballot. And both the bipartisan, I'm speaking in U.S. terms because it's both the multi-partisan committee and any input from the public. I mean, I imagine they got input from the public that wasn't mydemocracy.ca. But everyone said, we need a referendum, and most likely the result of that would be a proportional system.
Yes, the committee, which included members of the multi-partisan committee, definitely called for a proportional system. But the ranked ballot, which I don't think we really covered much, but basically...
We covered the ranked ballot.
Oh, yeah, we did cover the ranked ballot.
Yeah, we didn't cover it.
But it basically means that you end up with majorities still, and actually the committee, parts of them, determined that would actually be more harmful towards equal distribution than just keeping first past the post.
Yeah.
So they were definitely opposed to it.
But the Liberals having ranked ballot, which is arguably the one that favors them the most, that would look terrible. But everyone else said proportional representation, and they didn't want proportional representation. Their reasoning for it was that it would give rise to fringe. I believe Justin Trudeau even said, "Do you want Kelly Leitch to have her own party?" It's like...
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, he's just talked about it causing instability right now, and it's stuff that, honestly, you could argue, but I think is a bunch of hooey. It really comes down to the fact that it would hurt the Liberals, and they weren't brave enough to put in the legislation.
Yeah, they didn't want a referendum, they didn't want...
And yes, it is probably too late, because the election is actually going to be happening sooner rather than later, almost.
Yeah.
But it's a little too late to actually start going into, trying to do referendum for next election, but they could have had the referendum at next election and still be working forward with it, but they decided not to.
Anyway, we spent way too much time on that. Let's move on!
Any other updates?
Well, remember we did some sobering reflection on the terrible situation in the Philippines, and I would like to tell you that it's getting all better. No, I'm just kidding. That's definitely not happening. So, because a Korean businessman, is Korean or Malaysian?
Korean, I believe.
Korean? a businessman, was killed by the police. That incident exposed a large degree of corruption in the police force, which is not entirely surprising, let's just say. And now the drug war was kind of suspended, at least from a police angle, for a while, because they now need to investigate this police. Now they're bringing in the army. So that's...
Yeah. And now there is a much more recent article talking about lowering the age of incrimination. What's the
responsibility?
Age of responsibility.
Yes.
To 9 years old.
Yeah, it looks
from like 14. So those kids between 9 and 14 who, we looked at the numbers, and the vast majority of them that are being arrested, which is a tiny number compared to the everyone being arrested.
Everyone is arrested up in here.
Yeah. Everyone's being all arrested up in this place. All right, so those kids are actually mostly just drug users, and like literally only a few hundred, and there's a staggering number of kids being arrested, are actually involved in any sort of distribution.
Yeah.
But the excuse being given is that they're like still involved in the drug thing. So now all of a sudden you've got 9 to 14-year-old kids, and kids have been killed during this thing, bear in mind.
Yeah.
But now these are actually being specifically targeted as well. So these kids, so...
No, just thought since we gave you the news, we'd keep you somewhat updated on the news.
Unfortunately.
Now, let's go on to our local news.
So in local news, we're going to be talking about the ongoing case of Colten Boushie. Now, with this, one thing we do want to note is the trial is not done yet.
Exactly, yeah.
The details that we have, there's a lot of official details that haven't been let out.
Of course.
So there's a lot of, honestly, hearsay. And because the trial's being determined, everything, like, we want to be proper and say alleged about everything.
Exactly, yes. We are not the rebel.
We are not the rebel, so we'll make sure to say alleged. And if we miss it, we're saying it now.
Okay.
But we do have pretty much a fairly solid story about what went down that night. So I think we should probably start off with who is Colten Boushie and what's the story behind this.
Exactly.
So, on August 9th, Colten Boushie, a 22-year-old, and 4 of his friends were left from the Red Pheasant Reserve, which was 150 kilometers west of Saskatoon, and they were just having a night out, having fun, swimming, drinking, that sort of thing.
Doing the usual, we are young people in a rural area type thing.
Yeah. And there's kind of 2 couples in this and then another guy. That's this group of 5.
Yeah.
And so they're in his girlfriend's vehicle. It's an SUV. They end up driving, and they end up having car trouble, is the story generally given. The vehicle was found with a wheel, like, no tire on it, running on the rail.
Yeah, exactly.
So they pull into a farm.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is where kind of the stories diverge. The story from the kids is just that they were seeking help. Now, if you're talking to, I believe it's the son of the man accused, he basically was working with his father and saw somebody get out of the SUV, jump into the back of a pickup, and start up an ATV.
Yeah.
And they were thinking robbery, and they came out, and basically at this point, the stories do converge, and they were trying to get out of there.
Yep.
Because the kids were scared. And
specifically, 2 people left.
Yes,
left the area.
2 people left. It's unknown if they left before or after Stanley, Gerald Stanley, who is the accused, got his gun and fired 2 shots in the air.
Yes,
which is probably what happened. The kids seem to think that the bullets whizzed by them. Then what definitely happened is he went up to the car and at very short range shot Colten Boushie in the back of the head while he was in the vehicle with the 2 girls who remained, one of which was his girlfriend.
Okay.
At this point, the girls get out. One of them goes up, I believe the girlfriend goes up to Gerald's wife and is screaming, "Why did you kill Colten?" Like, he's fallen out of the car limp.
Yep.
Physical altercation happened. I think one of them pushed Miss Stanley. But yeah, from that point on, the police got involved. The story of actually how they told Colten's parents, mother specifically, is horrible in my opinion. The police, this is not just what the mother says, but all that she was living with a bunch of her kids. And the police basically told her that her son was dead. She fell down crying, distraught, and then they forced her way into her house and were looking for people associated. They didn't have a warrant. They were just nosing around. They woke up people because this was late at night.
Yeah.
She was waiting for her son to come home. they're trying to force her up off the floor, asking if she was on drugs or drunk.
Yeah.
Like, well, meanwhile, she's crying because she just got told her son was been killed.
Yeah, exactly. There's a discretion and restraint and, like, proper manner that you do things, especially if you're not dealing with a suspect. Even if you're dealing with a relative of a suspect, you'd be gentler and that.
Yes.
And then that. In this case, Colten Boushie's friends were not charged with any crime. That's an important thing to note. There were allegations from many people involved in this case that there was
the police were investigating that angle.
It did came out that the police were investigating them for theft. No charges were laid. And it's also rather, I would say, irregular that they announced that they're investigating people for theft. Apparently, the reporters who deal with crime reports say that the police in the area are generally very tight-lipped and do not say we're looking into somebody for a crime until they're actually laying charged, which seems like prudent.
If you watch any sort of TV drama, you see the police, we do not comment on an active investigation.
Exactly.
That's what they say. But in this case, they did not, which is interesting.
It's it's interesting. And one could, of course, speculate on why that could be, but let's move on.
Yeah. So one thing we did not mention, and we should probably talk about who Colten Boushie was, because that kind of affects this whole whole case. But we mentioned Red Pheasant Reserve.
Yes.
He's a native boy. He's a First Nations boy.
Yeah.
So that is where a lot of this comes in. His mother, obviously, he was living on the reserve, and Colten, by all accounts, was actually, and I mean, there's always the never speak ill of the dead.
Yeah.
But by all accounts, he was actually trying very hard to be very much involved in his community and was very well liked. He was actively seeking to get into firefighting, which is very noble. He had struggled with a neurological condition with one of his hands.
Okay.
Which had affected his ability to work. But he was still trying hard to do work. He was doing studies. One thing that was commonly posted is a study that he was doing on the effect of, what do you call them? Residential schools.
Yes.
Yes, the effect of residential schools. And he was very much involved in, there were other funerals that happened on the reserve, and they mentioned that he was one of the ones that usually would undertake the ceremonial role of staying by the fire with the body all night.
Yeah.
So he was very much involved in his the religion of his reserve.
Yeah.
He was very much involved in trying to help people, and I mean, he's only 22 years old. He's also just a kid.
Yeah, for sure. Where do we want to go from here? Why don't we just talk a little bit about the reaction to the case? Because it's very polarizing manner, and one because of Colten Boushie being a native person. There's all sorts of questions about whether this killing had anything to do with the race.
Yeah. Was this racially motivated?
Racially motivated.
Now, the charge has been laid for second degree. This isn't anything like first degree. There's no premeditation. According to the story, you can get that.
Yeah.
But the question is, due to his race, to that effect.
This is not a case of somebody killing him specifically because they're native, but a case of possibly, the angle most people are taking at this, is that the stereotypes around natives may have definitely played a role in how the farmer behaved towards him. The stereotype of natives as lazy, kind of hooligans, of thieves and criminals, which is a stereotype that is quite common in Canada towards natives. That natives are all sort of lazy. You hear lazy a lot.
Yeah. That
the government hands them everything, and that they are all alcoholics.
Or drug users.
And that they're all criminals.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's one article I was reading. I don't believe you went into this one. But it kind of went into that the climate of the area.
Yeah. And this is in Saskatchewan by Saskatchewan.
Yes. So this is the area that we're talking where the race issues are definitely prevalent. And this article is coming from the perspective of a bunch of people who have grown up on the reserves or in the inner city, but are First Nations background.
Yeah. Okay.
And they specifically, one of the ones I was hearing, there's also one from a white perspective as well.
Yeah.
But one of the things is that when they were growing up, and these are people who are young adults now,
yeah, they
were hearing stories from their parents and jokes when they were kids at the house parties, where racist jokes were incredibly common, and these stereotypes were lauded as true. And they mentioned it kind of got in their brains as kids. At the schools, they were the one white person who was talking here said that they were very involved in kind of being racist towards Native Americans and, or not Native Americans, First Nations kids, and that was just how it was, and it was everywhere.
Yeah.
And that sentiment continued into adulthood, and the one person here actually had to actively is seeking out an education and doing stuff like that in response to the ideas that he hears all the time that, oh, you can't get an education because you're First Nations. You can't go do something with yourself. Which is almost, it's weird. You get mad that First Nations kids, in your opinion, aren't making something of themselves, yet you fill their heads with ideas that they cannot. I mean...
Have you ever seen the film Zootopia?
I have not yet.
Okay.
It's been weeks.
Because, actually, I just thought of that. There's a very pertinent piece of dialogue from the fox in Zootopia, where there's discrimination in the Zootopia world against foxes, thinking that they're all criminals like sly foxes, right? And he makes a dialogue that he became a thief because it was easiest to become what people expected of them. Which is, it's a great sort of insight into how racism and prejudicial systems kind of multiply themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I can think of several situations when I was growing up where you hear the racist jokes. You get from a lot of people around that those sentiments about natives being lazy, alcoholic criminals.
Yeah.
Lazy is the most common one.
That is very common, yeah.
Like the very...
But alcohol has always been associated that way as well.
Yeah.
No, and when we're talking about reactions to this thing, we can talk about this and you may think it's almost hearsay, but examples being like a counselor for a rural community called Browning, Saskatchewan.
Yep.
His name's Ben Kotz. He posted on Facebook an idea that Gerald Stanley's only mistake was leaving witnesses. Now... A lot of groups, there's a Facebook group in reaction to this called Farmers for Firearms that has been created actually by somebody who lived very near to Gerald Stanley, and they definitely hold that they're not racist.
Yeah.
But a lot of the comments seem to trend that way. I was going through the Facebook group, and there's a lot of people just doing theft watches and whatnot, and the group itself says that they expunge all racist comments.
Yeah.
But there's that undertone behind everything, and... The big question comes with all these comments is, would they be the same if it was a white boy driving into a farm? Yeah. But because of this binary hostility that the environment has been creating, that there's actually, it's been affecting people in general. Like, farmers are being much more hostile with firearms in general there as well. And this is just ramping it up. Add into that race issue, and you've got a very dangerous situation.
I want to note that racism is a lot more insidious and subtle than I think most people think.
Mm-hmm.
What I think people don't realize is that for most people, being racist isn't an active thing. Because, in a lot of cases, the environment people grow up in has some degree of racism and sexism. Because of that, if you don't work against that environment, you will simply swim with the stream.
Yeah.
If you grow up in an environment, and pretty much all of us grow up in environments where racial prejudices are around.
Yes.
I'm not saying we all grew up in Alabama when there was slavery, but there is some degree of racial prejudice around. Mm-hmm. We will mirror that unless we make an active choice not to.
Yeah. And you have to be looking at your own thoughts and actions to actually try to perceive that sometimes. I think one thing, too, is that racism, we've definitely, in the very positive way, we've attributed very negative ideas to that.
Yes.
That word. However, because there's such a spectrum of what can be racist, there's always going to be someone more racist than you.
Yes.
And you can apply the term racist to that. And thereby, anybody, and I would dare at times probably include myself in this group, can say, I'm not racist because I'm not like this.
Yes.
Looking at a very almost extreme version.
Mm-hmm.
However, you've got to actually analyze what you do, what you think about people, right? How you react intrinsically to people of different races or people of different sexism, people of different sexes around you, and see how that initial reaction is distorted.
Yeah.
And that's where your actual racism is. And I think it's very bad to just go out and say, I'm not racist, because that's kind of hard to just outright say. You have to be fairly analytical.
Yeah. So, to bring it back to this case, when we say that this attack might have been racially motivated, we are not saying that Gerald Stanley is a
Grand Wizard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or is a man who would advocate for the killing of indiscriminate killing of natives or anything like that. We are just saying that his prejudices about natives may have played a role in how he treated it.
Example being, according to the different angles of the story, we don't know if theft was occurring.
Yes.
However, in my mind, I have no doubt that Gerald Stanley had, or very little doubt that he had in his mind that they were stealing.
Yes.
And because he's an older man, and this is rural Saskatchewan, I would not be surprised.
Because he's a person.
Because he's a person. But specifically that demographic.
Yeah.
I would not be at all surprised it's because a bunch of native kids came on his property. Now, we don't know if they were actually stealing or not. That is an unknown. Now, granted, Canadian law does not give you the right to just shoot somebody even if they're stealing on your property.
Yeah.
it pretty much, you can only kill someone in self-defense.
Exactly.
So, yeah, the eminent domain is the term, or I can't remember.
I'm not sure of the exact legal, we're not legal experts on this show. Yeah. We are just broke newscasters.
We are just broke newscasters. But basically, when it comes down to, I find the theft angle, especially a lot of people who are trying to defend Stanley's actions, saying that angle as, and the farmers for firearms are the same idea. They're like, oh, you shoot somebody who's doing something around your property, but you don't have that right in Canada. Mm-hmm. So I find it very odd that, now granted, I'm coming from a very pacifist view, so this stuff offends me on a very personal level. But yeah, the idea of just shooting somebody on your property, you don't have that right in Canada, so I'm surprised that that's been used as an angle.
I mean, it's not wholly surprising that in a rural area, the idea of defending your land, the idea of firearms is present. That doesn't surprise me wholly. Now, if this was a guy from Saskatoon instead of a guy from the reserve, a white guy who was going to the University of Saskatoon or Saskatchewan. I think the University of Saskatchewan might be in Regina, but let's going to a student at a local institution in the actual city, a white guy, would these same comments be there? Would the reaction be largely more sympathetic towards the victim? Probably.
Yeah. Now, speaking of, I do think to try to not balance it out, but we should actually be covering some rural perspectives on this.
Yeah.
And there's actually one really good CBC article, which basically comes from the guy who started the Farmers with Firearms.
Yep.
And the idea that they're basically saying is that RCMP response times are low.
Yeah.
They need firearms in a farm to just chase out animals and stuff, which I agree with. It makes sense.
It's just a fact of life on most rural areas that firearms are more present, and there's good reason for that.
But apparently, now the rate hasn't been discriminated between rural and urban, but crime rates in Saskatchewan are up. One could probably blame the downturn of the economy for that. Sure. And farmers, apparently, by and large, are feeling like they need to go further to protect themselves.
Yeah.
And that's where this group has gotten a lot of momentum from. He says the RCMP presence is insufficient for the level of crime and the distances. The response times are so low, and not having a gun is a huge danger. Okay. And that's the argument that they're saying here for this, kind of somewhat trying to defend Gerald Stanley's reaction, at least to bring out the firearm, in the very least.
But you look at the case, and by all accounts given in the police report, it seems like and in most cases, just the presence of a gun is going to be enough. Unless you have a group of people that are armed themselves, the presence of a gun is going to scare off any robber.
Well, and when it comes to guns and scaring off people, like anybody with proper firearms training, I'm not one, but I do know this, is you only point at what you want to shoot. Oh, like, you never threaten by pointing the gun at something you're not willing or wanting to shoot. Now, in this case, there has been discussion of what if this was an accidental misfire or some nervous twitch that caused this gun to actually go up. But the bullet went into the back of the kid's head from close range. Like, there is credence to basically say that he was pointing the gun at somebody, And at the very least, if it was an accidental discharge, that's improper gun technique. You should not be pointing it at somebody you're not willing to shoot.
Yeah.
That's not... But yeah, bringing out a gun very often escalates the situation, and it can scare off people, but especially in more violent cases, bringing out a gun can actually be harmful, and that's why the police often ask you to leave stuff to them. Because if you're untrained or whatever, and don't know how to deal with it, you can actually make things much worse by bringing out a gun. And I think this is definitely a case where that is obvious.
Yeah, and I'd also like to see what the crime statistics actually are in rural Saskatchewan.
Versus urban?
Versus urban, and what, like, I know there's the perception among farmers that there's a lot of theft, but I would like to see whether the actual statistics bear out.
Yeah.
That's just, but I'm just a person that likes to see the statistics.
Yeah.
And, that's about, I think, all we have to say about this particular matter. Do you have anything else?
I don't have anything else to add. I mean, we'll probably have to return to this story at some point in the future when the case actually gets heard and the more of the details come out and verdicts are determined.
Yes.
But for now, that's where we stand. And I think the most important point of note is to take everything with a grain of salt, everything said to you, and bear in mind the climate of the whole area.
Yes, of course.
When you're considering all situations, and that the race issue is not just the idea that, oh, he's, racist and going out and trying to shoot Native kids. It's the idea that, little intrinsic things that you might not even notice may have had a fairly negative impact in this, and had a fairly negative impact to the reaction. I mean, even going to how the police interacted with when they told the mother that her son had died. I mean, that seems to be somewhat racially affected.
Yeah, what are some stereotypes of Native people that were played into on that specific thing? Mm-hmm. Well, we just talked about alcohol, drugs, like it's pretty on the face of it, pretty on the nose. All right, let's move on to national news.
So we're talking about this story, and this has to do with Justin Trudeau's trip to the Aga Khan's Island.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't know, the very basics of this are the idea that Justin Trudeau and his wife and kids went to a private island of this very rich man, to Aga Khan's Island.
The Aga Khan.
The Aga Khan. And they spent a vacation pretty much.
It was over Christmas.
Yes, it was over Christmas. And one of the things that they did, which is particularly of note in this case, is that they actually took his private plane to get there.
Now, this is problematic for two reasons. One, the Aga Khan has a charitable foundation, which is given funding by the Canadian government. So, of course, this is in direct conflict of interest, where you have a benefactor of the Canadian government giving a perk to an elected official of the Canadian government. So that is in direct conflict of interest. Mm-hmm. Now, it is of note that the Aga Khan is a longtime family friend of the Trudeaus. Aga Khan was a pallbearer at Pierre Trudeau's funeral. Like, these are people that have known each other for a long time. It's not unusual. It does not seem like it is a direct bribe of any sort.
No, it seems like something. However, generally, it's accepted that when you take office, you forgo some of these perk-like things for a while with rich friends.
Well, at the very least, rich friends that deal business with your government. True. Right?
Yeah.
And the other problem is that there is a direct ethics guideline that bars the use of private aircraft by elected officials. This was put into place a while ago, I believe, in response to some allegations for Paul Martin. So that gives you an idea of how long ago that was.
Yeah.
That under very few circumstances would elected officials use private aircraft.
Yeah.
And permission would have to be given.
Yeah, there's a whole rigmarole.
Yeah, exactly. Where none of this was followed. So what this seems right here is a lack of judgment by Justin Trudeau.
Yes.
And it kind of speaks to a larger problem and a larger sort of issue with allegations of corruption, of pay-for-access type stuff that we'll get into a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as we expand the story, we'll kind of head into that direction.
Yeah.
But yeah, as was pretty much said, this does, at least to me, seem like a trip with a family friend. However, it is a very poor poor choice of judgment because of the relationship here and the fact that he's prime minister. And there have been other national allegations about some of this sort of stuff where you could pay for dinner with a politician. It's not supposed to be any sort of pay for access, but when you're having dinner with somebody,
it basically
is. You're not going to pay a whole bunch of money to go have dinner with the finance minister normally.
And just to, I mean, I'm sure the finance minister is a wonderful person. I don't know his or her name. Do you know?
No.
Okay. I'm sure this imaginary person that is the finance minister, that we don't know who it is a wonderful person to spend dinner with. But let's be real. You're doing it because you want to have his or her or its ear.
Their ear.
Their ear. Yeah, there you go. Their ear on issues that concern you. So let's get into that.
Yeah.
The Liberal Party does a lot of fundraisers.
Yes.
Every political party does fundraisers. They need money to run offices, to campaign for candidates, to run websites, to do all the various things that they do, to give you emails and leaflets in the mail about the latest issues that concern your riding.
Thank you, Randy.
Is that the name of your local MP?
Yeah, it is.
Randy who?
Boissonnaud. But he's the guy who's in all the LGBTQ stuff. Because he's kind of the most prominent, I guess, in that community who's in office. So.
Okay.
If ever you read something federally about something positive for gay people, his name's probably going to be somewhere there.
Okay. There you go. My local MP is Matt Jerome? No, it's a French name.
Oh.
Gennaro.
Oh, I got a French one too.
Yeah, okay. This is the worst podcasting segment in the history of time. Yeah. Keep that in. Keep that in too. So, but what people have questions about on these events is that there is these events where they pay up to $1,500 and some prominent government ministers and sometimes even Justin Trudeau are there, and it's definitely marketed so that part of the perk of being there is that you get to talk to these elected leaders.
Yeah.
Now, people are concerned about this because what are they going to talk about? They're going to talk about the issues that matter to them. They're going to get lobbied at these fundraisers. These people that have enough money to spend $1,000 plus
1,500, I think, is
1,500 plus, or well, up to 1,500, are going to have more access and influence the government officials that make decisions that affect all of us. They're going to favor those that spend the money.
Well, it's not just favoritism, too, right? It's you're actually having face-to-face contact, whereas your usual ways of contacting your MP are mail, email. Town halls, and most of the time, aside from town halls, you're going through someone or your access is very limited.
Yes.
Whereas here, you're sitting down for probably several hours with somebody like that. That's a lot of access, and that's what the idea of pay for access. It's not just pay to get access, because if you go to a town hall, you probably can talk to somebody, but it's going to be like a short question or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's been a lot of these fundraisers over the past year, and more questions have been raised about this appearance of corruption, this appearance of possible lobbying and favoritism to those who are donors.
Now, this begs the question, why are they having so many fundraisers?
So, until fairly recently, the
people upstairs are moving a table. We're broke. We're in an apartment. Continue.
Have fun editing this, man.
The more you say like that, the more I have to edit out. This is going to get up to next week.
Oh boy, this is bad. Okay, so until recently, in 2011, there's public funding for political parties on a per vote basis.
No. What this basically means is however many votes, proportionally, your party gets, is basically the government will give you that much funding. Now, this is very good for pretty much every party but the Conservatives.
And the Liberals.
The Liberals now. But, back in 2011, it was definitely still favoring the Conservatives. But yes, the NDP, the Green, the Bloc Québécois, they all were very dependent on this government funding for their campaigns. Because outside of this, you're relying solely on private donors.
Private donors.
Yeah.
So it favors the big parties.
It does.
It just as a Cliff Notes version of everything you said. It favors the big parties that have more money to fundraise and have more centrist, business-friendly
policies.
Yes. It was a big issue that caused the attempted coalition forming between the Bloc Québécois, the NDP, and the Liberals in 2011 under Stéphane Dion. Mm-hmm. We're saying that name a lot for some reason. And eventually in May of 2011, after an election, and it was an issue that the Conservatives had campaigned on, the per vote subsidy was eliminated.
Yeah.
So that's why we have all these political fundraisers, where we have this question of paper access. And again, it also favors the ruling party.
Mm-hmm.
Because the ruling party is the one that gets to make governmental decisions, and one that gets to market the access to decision makers.
Well, and we saw that just between the numbers from back then and numbers now in terms of how much parties are getting.
Yeah.
The Liberals and Conservatives are basically neck and neck now.
Yeah.
Whereas
in 2009, when the Conservatives were in power, the Conservatives were getting much more private donations than the Liberals. Now, it's also to note that private donations to political parties are subsidized heavily by tax credits.
Yes.
So, if one were to cap more of the private funding and put in a public funding to political parties, the cost to the taxpayer would not be that much.
No, it would be essentially the same.
So, for every dollar that I give to the Conservative Party, let's say, okay?
Yeah, you give to the Conservative Party?
This is a hypothetical.
Okay,
I don't give to any political party. You know why? 'Cause I'm broke. It's in the name of the podcast. Okay? Alright. So for every dollar I hypothetically give to a Conservative party, $1 comes from my taxes that I pay lots of because I'm broke. It's a joke, guys. To the Conservative Party because of tax credits.
Yes.
So, if we publicly funded political parties, the political parties would not have to fundraise as much and would get less private donation.
Fewer private donations.
I will strangle you. Continuing. Thus, the net cost to the taxpayer of a public funding for political parties is roughly the same as our current system, and the only change will be the distribution A, and with public funding, this cash for access, this money buying influence in our politics will be lessened.
Yes. And we'll have less stories like the idea that $1,500 gets you a seat with the minister at dinner, or granted the previous one was a poor decision on Justin Trudeau, but any of these, these fundraising things will be lessened or eliminated.
And hopefully, if they did that, we would never have to talk it again and have this horrible segment.
Yes, this is very clunky. The math is staggering in this. We didn't even go into it much, but I think that pretty much covers the ideas.
Okay. I think we should definitely move on to the next segment, and I will bid you good luck at editing it.
Woo! And we're back.
We are back, and we are going to talk about the Yemeni Civil War, which is a conflict that before I did a whole bunch of research on, I knew nothing about, and that's why we're doing it right now.
Like, there might be a few questions you're asking, like, where is Yemen?
Yes.
It has a civil war?
Yep.
And is ISIS involved?
What about the Al-Qaeda? Are they involved?
Al-Qaeda.
Are they involved?
So these are questions we will hopefully answer.
What are we doing there? Are we doing anything there?
No, we're in Edmonton.
No, but we as in the Canadian government and the West in general, what is their involvement in the Civil War, Yemeni Civil War, if there is one? No, if we have some involvement, not if there is a civil war. There is a civil war.
All right. So let's just start off. Where is Yemen?
Yemen is just south of Saudi Arabia, kind of on the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula.
So it's one of those tiny little countries.
Yeah.
That's dwarfed by Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Its only land border is Saudi Arabia. The rest of its border is coast. It's just on the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, just northeast of Africa, if you're looking at it on the map.
Northeast of Djibouti.
That's true. It is just northeast of Djibouti.
Which you probably also have never heard about.
What are you talking about? Our listeners are very educated about the geographics of Djibouti.
A tiny little French-speaking country in Africa.
Yes. All right. So
this thing pretty much all started in around 2004. That was when insurgency pretty much broke her down, right?
yes, there are two major groups in Yemen that are fighting. You have the Houthis, which are the rebels, and the government. Mm-hmm. The Houthis have been rebelling against government in some way since 2004. So it's important to note that the Houthis are a Shia group, yes, and that the government is composed mainly of Sunni Muslims.
Now, Shiites and Sunnis they split off very early in the history of Islam. So yes, Muhammad basically died, and the entire split is based off of who would be the next leadership. Okay. So the Sunnis basically agreed that the kind of religious leaders of the time, the Caliphate, would keep up the religious leadership, mm-hmm, whereas the Shiites were basically waiting for another appointment from God. And I believe initially they were going with his family.
Okay.
Muhammad's family. So this is a very long-standing divide. I'm sure you've heard the terms, listeners at home, but just so you know, this is kind of where it all stems from. It is incredibly early in the history of Islam that these two groups have separated.
And it's important when we note who is backing which faction, and largely the conflicts in the Middle East very often fall under Shia versus Sunni lines. Iran is a country with a Shia majority and a Shia government that does not generally like the Sunni groups, where Saudi Arabia is the opposite.
Yeah. So thereby, Saudi Arabia is supporting the local government, but the rebels are being supported or backed by Iran.
Yes. All right. So this insurgency by the Houthis was going on for a long time. In 2009, heated even more. 2011, there was a revolution where the Houthis declared support for the resignation of the president.
Yeah.
They boycotted the 2012 election of the current president, Hadi.
Yeah, and this is where the conflict really started to grow in 2012 as well. This is where things started getting more and more violent.
Exactly. In 2014, the fighting starts. I believe this was around the time of the Arab Spring, to give you an idea of that, where you had the deposition of many despots in the region, protests, all that kind of thing.
And in this time, this is also when the president did resign.
Yes, Hadi did resign. So the fighting started in 2014. The Houthis controlled the capital and imprisoned the president Hadi. But Hadi managed to flee and set up his own government in another city. So then you have the Houthis controlling one part of the country, and the government forces led by Hadi controlling another.
So the seat of government is not in the capital city anymore.
The seat of the government by the government forces.
Yes.
The seat of the government of the rebels is in the capital city of Sinai, or Sini, or we looked up about 50 pronunciations.
Yeah. Sinai. I like the sound of Sinai the best, but Sinai also works.
We found many different pronunciations, and we're not sure of which one is actually correct. If anybody knows, they could tell us. That'd be nice.
Just write it how you spell it in the comments, and we'll be able to figure out.
Yeah. So in 2015, after Hadi fled and set up his own government, that's when the Civil War really formally started. Around this time, you had more instability, where you had terrorism activity by Al-Qaeda and ISIL, and each of those groups took a fair amount of territory in the chaos as well. If you look at the map of Yemen and the Civil War, you see that the eastern end of the country, where the capital city is taken over by the Houthis. Most of the eastern end is taken over by the government forces, and Al-Qaeda controls significant areas of territory as well as small pockets of ISIL control.
Yeah. So it honestly, the map looks kind of akin to Syria, with the government and the rebels kind of holding two positions, and then minor groups holding pockets.
Yes,
around.
and we didn't even mention some local leaders holding some small areas that aren't part of any of these groups.
Yeah. But the ISIL and Al-Qaeda have been fairly active, so that they are noteworthy, definitely, in this area.
Especially if you look at Al-Qaeda more so than ISIL, if you look at the amount of territory controlled by Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, they were actually able to take a provincial capital, albeit briefly.
Yes.
So they have been able to have significant influence in the area.
So the West in general, although not with troops, but definitely with funding and diplomatic support, are backing the government forces with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
In addition, the Canadian government went into a fairly significant arms deal with the Saudi Arabia, which was criticized quite heavily at the time because Saudi Arabia has a fairly terrible human rights record.
Yeah.
This deal was taken during the Harper government, where Canada would sell a bunch of light armored vehicles. Now, these aren't just like Jeeps.
No,
These
are like APC level or tank looking things.
They are very tank looking type things to the Saudi Arabian government. And at the time there was concern that they would be used to suppress their citizens, as there is video footage of the Saudi Arabian government using these types of vehicles against their own citizens. And it also has been confirmed, or at very least there's strong evidence to support the fact that Canadian made light armored vehicles have been used against the rebel forces in Yemen.
Yeah. Now, America, and this, has also been supporting, but they've also been undergoing some operations, not against any of the two major groups, but mostly against the minor groups, who are admittedly terrorist organizations.
Yes.
So these groups are generally opposed by all the major ones, and the government officially has sanctioned them to come in and do certain things.
Exactly. This is probably where, if you follow the news, you might have heard the name Yemen. Yes, is fairly early in President Trump's administration. He had approved a raid into Yemen, which resulted in the death of a Marine, was the first reportings.
Yeah.
But as more has come out, there was many civilian casualties.
Including a little girl whose picture's been plastered everywhere.
Exactly. So I kind of went into the basics of the arms deal, although I should mention that even though the deal was done by the Harper government, it was continued under the Trudeau government.
Now, the U.S. has been, in this time, doing mostly kind of drone strikes against Al-Qaeda. ISIL is there, but Al-Qaeda is the big terrorist organization, as we mentioned. And, I mean, the UN in this whole situation, by the way...
We'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about sort of the fallout.
Sure. So, basically, the news story that you hear about is this one raid. Yeah. And this raid was actually to gather intelligence, primarily. And it was targeting an Al-Qaeda leader who is in a house with a bunch of family. Mm-hmm. And they were supposed to basically storm the building, I believe, to try to capture and get information.
Exactly. This mission was planned for a very long time, planned during the Obama administration. It had been brought up several times during the Obama administration, but never approved by Obama. And then Trump came in, and it was fairly immediately approved. Mm-hmm. And by most accounts, besides President Trump, the raid did not go very well.
Yeah. We have accounts from survivors, as well as some of the soldiers, that this thing was pretty much a gone show from the get-go.
There was not enough background intelligence. There was not enough support. They crashed an aircraft.
They had to force to blow it up. 6 people who were 6 soldiers that weren't killed, but there were 6 others injured. This is fairly significantly poorly done.
Yeah, and 10 children and 9 women were killed in the attack. Most accounts of it just shows a raid that had gone wrong from the start.
Yeah.
Now, President Trump has declared it a success based on the intelligence gathered during the raid of this Al-Qaeda leader's house, but there are some questions about that. Mm-hmm. As proof of their success, they had posted a video showing some bomb making.
This is the Pentagon here.
Yeah, this is the Pentagon. The administration had released a video captured from the compound, which showed some bomb making techniques and strategies. But if you talk to anti-terrorism experts, They said that these types of videos are the kinds of things you could get by simply looking online within a few hours.
These are incredibly common. This video is nothing special.
In fact, this video is perhaps a decade old.
Yeah.
So, if this video is typical of the type of intelligence that they found, they have gained essentially nothing of value from this raid.
The Al-Qaeda leader was killed.
Yes, it did kill the Al-Qaeda leader, but with all the civilian casualties, which are not only tragic in their own right, but they provide great recruiting tools for terrorists. And also there was, after the raid went so badly that there was some talk that the Yemeni government was much more reluctant in order to allow U.S. operations in their country.
They were about to revoke that permission.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it did not go over well by the officials on the ground, the government officials.
Now, the accounts from the survivors, too, say, like, that what went down there with the civilians being killed, there were people running away, being shot in the back. Mm-hmm. Like, it was apparently, they got in there, they started getting hit, and they kind of went, I don't want to say crazy, but they just kind of started firing on anything that moved. Yes. It was pretty much the way it sounded.
Yeah, it's, as I said, just went wrong from the beginning. This transitioned nicely into the humanitarian situation in Yemen. And if you look at the lots, of course, of civilian casualties, there have been airstrikes and attacks, both Saudi-led on the Houthis and by the Houthis on civilians. There have been allegations that the Houthis have prevented aid workers from giving aid. There is huge malnutrition problems for the children of the area. There are 100,000 plus refugees seeking asylum.
Yeah, and then even like millions of displaced people within the country.
Yep. So what this really paints a picture of is a conflict where both parties are quite guilty of crimes of war and targeting civilians.
Yeah.
And it is important to note that we are definitely backing one side in this. We are backing the government side.
Yeah. And yeah, although, you know, this conflict is bad, and one might argue that ending the conflict is good. And I mean, in terms of temporary, there has been a lot of talks from the UN and other places for ceasefires, particularly to help evacuate civilians and get aid workers in to help out a little bit. But by and large, yeah, you're still backing a group that has done some bad things.
Well, we're backing, this is a Saudi-led group, and I'm sure many people have heard about the human rights situation in Saudi Arabia is rather terrible. So it's not a huge surprise that a Saudi-backed government and a Saudi-led effort, for the most part, because Saudi Arabia is the major financial backer of the government, has been indiscreet in their waging of this war.
Yeah.
So, on that lovely note, I think that's about all we have in that for today. With,
I think it's about time to hopefully end on a more cheerful note.
Yeah!
And talk about silly internet comedians for news that doesn't matter.
Let's do that.
So, how many of you have heard the name PewDiePie?
Probably at least two of you.
Yeah.
Probably at least two of you
You're
listen.
talking to our whole audience, friend.
I know. So you got a little bit of hot water over the last bit, eh?
Yeah, he's been, distanced from Disney and, from...
YouTube has canceled his partnership. Also, he's been removed from YouTube's premium stuff, and Google as a company has distanced him. His videos have not been deleted or anything.
No. He's still making content, but he's lost definitely some revenue streams.
Definitely.
And he's lost definitely some of the perks that he once had.
So, what caused everyone to do that?
Well, the main one, the one that I've definitely heard about. Okay, so let me preface this. There are these weird internet services that you may or may not have heard about.
So what you're saying is that there's weird things that are on the internet.
Yeah, the internet is weird. So, there's a few. Tyrone, I believe, is the one fellow's name that I know about. But you basically pay somebody a very small amount of money.
Yep.
Like, we're talking on the scope of like $5 or under.
Okay.
And they will record a short video.
Okay.
Generally all in the same format. The one I've seen was a man who sits in front
facing the camera with a TV screen, and he'll wear maybe a few props that he has, and he'll put something on the computer screen, and he'll basically say whatever you want as long as it isn't necessarily bad. Well, not everybody has these filters. So PewDiePie basically paid a bunch of people to dance around with a sign that says, "Death to all Jews."
That sounds like a rather hilarious goof. Why was anybody upset about that?
Well, promoting anti-Semitism usually is not, the best thing to do, especially when you're in the public eye to a lot of children.
But Christian, wasn't it just a harmless joke?
It's just a prank, bro.
Christian, I'm trying to devil's advocate this.
I know. But what we're getting into the problem here is depending on how you joke about such things, it can very easily transition from just a joke to people actually laughing and ironically at it, especially when it's a kind of more in-your-face, shock-based, basal humor. Which this was. I mean, he's just having a bunch of, believe it was Indian kids dance around with a sign that says "Death to all Jews." That was supposed to be funny in and of itself. I mean, majority of people probably think it's stupid. I know my parents would think that was just stupid. Mm-hmm. But, people will laugh at that being like, "Oh, that's so silly." But then people will probably laugh about it being like, "Oh my goodness, look how this message," and actually start.
It's okay.
Yeah.
For the first part, there's no deeper message or anything. This is just shock for shock's sake.
Yeah.
There's no real redeeming factor beyond just shock. And you have to be very cautious with that. Because if you're just shocking for shock's sake, and then you get blowback from that, and then you start to get mad about that,
and defensive
about that, then you do it more. You start just doing things to piss people off, and then becoming the enemy of those you piss people off being your MO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
this is kind of the 4chan thing.
Yes, because Pepe the Frog did not start out as sinister as he is now.
Yeah.
Pepe the Frog is a symbol that is now listed as an anti-Semitic figure by the Anti-Defamation League.
Yeah, he's tied heavily with Trump supporters and everything now. And
with Trump supporters, the alt-right, Richard Spencer.
Yep.
Is that the right Spencer?
Not Sean Spicer.
No, Richard Spencer, the Nazi.
He might even agree with you on that.
He probably would. Coiner of the term alt-right often wears a Pepe the Frog pin. It's a symbol of that group. Well, it just started as a ironic joke. The thing that wasn't meaning anything, and people got mad about how shocking things were, and then the channers got mad at the people that were shocked at things, and then channers' enemy became the people that get shocked and don't understand that's for the lulz, and then it's not for the lulz and you're Nazis.
Yeah. And then it starts getting adopted either by those people who are changing their views or people whose views are actually not ironic.
Yeah, when there's no signal that this is ironic or satire, you just get fans that are straight up Nazis.
Yeah.
So it's completely understandable that a lot of people have distanced themselves from PewDiePie after this complete and utter lapse in judgment. There's a bit of a there's a lot of YouTubers that have started to go down this road.
Yeah, there's some that have, you would argue, just ties to the alt-right.
Yeah.
Yeah, an example would be JonTron.
Yeah.
Who's been, on a long, laborious rant session with the Sargon of Akkad.
Oh, Sargon of Akkad. Sargon of Akkad, if you don't know, is a prominent-ish right-wing-ish YouTuber guy.
Yeah, he probably got most of his initial popularity from posting anti-creationism sort of things.
You're thinking of Thunderfoot. You're thinking of Thunderfoot.
I'm thinking of Thunderfoot then. Yes. Anyway, Sargon of Akkad. Still, he posts those right-wing videos bashing.
He was very much got a lot of fame from the whole Gamergate thing. Oh, Gamergate. And lots of videos bashing feminists and Specifically, Arnita Sarkeesian, the favorite feminist bogeyman who is coming to take away all of our games.
Yep.
And who is probably funding this podcast with the Source Foundation.
Yep. Thank you to all of our sponsors.
Sponsors mostly the Source Foundation.
Yeah.
We're going to have to change our name if we get too much funding.
Yeah. By the way, if you pay $1,500, we will totally eat dinner with you.
I mean, yes. We'll pay for dinner if you pay.
If you give us $1,500, you get a free dinner on us.
No one's going to get the Source Foundation joke.
No.
I get it. That's all that matters.
That is all that matters.
Okay, so I think that's all we have for today.
Yeah, this is going to be more of a clunky episode, but it's been a bit of a long week.
Yeah, well, we got a podcast in, Christian.
We got a podcast in. We didn't go 2 weeks again, so
that's great. That's great. So I think we're just going to keep on talking, and the music's going to go over this.
Ooh, we can do that again. We might run out the gag, though, if we keep doing it.
I don't know. I think we should run out the gag as long as possible. I mean, I did just make a gag that literally was only for me.
Should we keep talking and then have, like, the music actually stop and we're, like, still talking?
We could do that. I mean, it would be a great idea.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that would get us all the fans.
I'm pretty sure this episode has gone on too short. And it should go on longer. Fight Nazis, guys!